The Unmarked, Chapter 18. The Other Face of the Beast. Kaleb bit his lip and tried to conceal the frosty breaths that kept escaping his open mouth. Taking a quiet step backward, Kaleb tripped over a thick branch and crashed loudly into the undergrowth behind him. The dragon swiftly rose, its giant hind legs rippling as it stretched to its full height. Kaleb's hand went to his axe. Just as it reached the handle, the wounded creature's snout shot forward. It clamped its long, sharp teeth around the axe head. Then the dragon dragged Kaleb by his axe, still anchored under his belt, out of the thick brush at the edge of the clearing and into its open center. Kaleb winced at the blunt force of the ground against his shoulders as the dragon hauled him across the forest floor. A moment later, the creature released Kaleb's axe from its toothy jaw. Kaleb dropped to the ground with a gasp. He was now only several steps removed from the beast's long, milk-colored talons. Dizzy and panting, Kaleb tried to scramble back onto his feet. Nevertheless, something within Kaleb cautioned him not to run. The young man feared that if he ran away, he might only lead the dragon back to his companions, thus dooming them all to death by tooth or talon. Against a swelling panic, Kaleb considered his options. He glanced back at the tree line. It was possible the beast couldn't follow him into the thick foliage at the edge of the clearing. Kaleb looked up. The dragon must have reached this clearing by descending through the wide gaps in the trees above. If Kaleb could make a dash for the thick trees at the edge of the clearing, who knew? He might just stand a chance of survival. But before he could pursue this plan, the dragon lunged forward again, pushing Kaleb back to the ground under its strong claw. The beast bent its long snout down until it was less than a foot from Kaleb's face. Kaleb held his breath and cringed. The creature's bright yellow and black eyes blinked several times. Hot dragon breath gusted into Kaleb's face, drawing beads of sweat to his forehead. Kaleb squeezed his eyes tightly shut. But after a few seconds passed by, without a flash of pain or a terrifying screech from the beast, Kaleb eased his eyes, open again. The dragon was still staring into his face. It struck Kaleb as odd that the creature had not already crushed him under its talons or swept him into the trees with back-breaking force as he had watched the dragon do in Ablerin that very morning. Instead, the dragon appeared to be sizing Kaleb up with its senses. As it had done to Freylin the day before, the beast sniffed at Kaleb's hair and tunic, twitching its broad nostrils as it did. Then, to Kaleb's astonishment, the dragon took a short step back. It turned its head sideways with a quizzical look, the same way Kaleb had seen the coyotes cock their heads when asked a question by Fallwrinkle. Kaleb crawled back up to a sitting position and waited for the pounding of his heart to subside. He squinted his eyes to get a better look at the dragon in the waning light. By the look in the beast's face, Kaleb would have to guess that it was trying to remember something, or perhaps clear up some confusion in its mind. Kaleb. His scalp jumped at the whisper in the trees behind him. Though startled, Kaleb did not move. Without looking behind him, he recognized the voice as Teva's. "Teva, are you alone?" Kaleb whispered. "Yes, Grimwood is asleep. So is Madge," the wolf said. Do you think it sees you?" "I'm not sure the dragon could see much of anything," said the wolf. "What are you doing out here?" "I came looking for you." Is Glista there too?" "No, I have not seen her since I left our camp," the wolf said. The dragon suddenly pivoted its long head sideways, its left ear trained on the edge of the clearing where Teva was hiding. The creature skipped over Kaleb, careful to avoid stepping on him. Then it sniffed the brush where Teva had just concealed herself. Kaleb rose shakily to his feet. He peered between the dragon's broad hind legs to see if Teva had hidden herself well enough to avoid detection by the dragon's weak eyes. But just then, something happened to turn Kaleb's stomach. The black wolf emerged from between two dense bushes to the dragon's left. Without hesitating, she crossed into the open clearing. Moonlight bounced off her sleek black coat. Kaleb held his breath. Teva was walking in a straight line toward the dragon. The dragon's eyes locked onto the wolf. Kaleb slowly drew his axe from under his belt, but he could not decide what to do with it. Strangely composed, the wolf continued her serene amble toward the dragon. Finally, the two creatures, Black Wolf and Orange Dragon, were face to face. "What are you doing, Teva?" hissed Kaleb. For some time, the wolf stood in silence, head cocked to the side, looking up curiously at the towering beast. Then Kaleb nearly fainted. For without warning, Teva leaned in and pressed her muzzle gently against the dragon's orange belly. It was like watching a giant puppy nestle into its mother's fur. Visions of the dragon snapping Teva's neck with his giant jaw flashed into Kaleb's mind. "Get away from it, Teva! Are you crazy?" After a confused moment, the dragon let out something closer to a gravelly purr than a roar. Then, to Kaleb's surprise, it lowered its head and rubbed its furry neck against Teva's back. Kaleb stood dumbstruck as the two creatures sniffed and stroked each other like babies tossing around together in the same crib. But suddenly, the dragon snapped its head back and shrieked. Teva took a cautious step back, but the beast was not shrieking at her. Instead, the dragon reeled back several yards, flailing its neck and short forelegs. It was as though the creature was trying to reach the open sore on its back. Kaleb suddenly remembered the dragon's pained whimpers when he first came upon the beast. Of course, the wound that Verlisden had inflicted on the creature with her enchanted weapon had not yet healed. Teva backpedaled to get out of the thrashing creature's way, her blue eyes filled with concern as the dragon writhed in the clearing. Kaleb crossed to her and laid his hand on her neck to steady himself. "What was all that?" he said. "I had a hunch," said Teva, "from watching that dragon up close that the creature was familiar to me. Fortunately for us, my hunch was right." "But I thought you'd never seen a dragon before." "I hadn't." "Then how did you know the dragon wouldn't harm you?" Kaleb said. "I didn't know for sure," said Teva, blinking a few times. Kaleb stared at the wolf in puzzled silence. "Kaleb, I must ask you an important question," Teva said. "Do you know the way back to Terrashine?" She trained her glimmering blue eyes on him. You mean without a map?" "Yes, without a map." "I suppose I could find it, or at least get close. I know it's to our east, about a 10-hour trip, I'd guess." "By walking, you mean," said Teva. "That's not quick enough." She looked back at the dragon, her bright eyes roving over the ornate wings tucked tightly against the beast's orange back. Fruitlessly, the dragon extended its forked purple tongue to coat the festering wound in saliva, but failed to reach the opening in its tender flesh. The creature cried out again, more pitifully than before. "Why do you ask me this, Teva?" Kaleb said. "Do you mean to go on to Terrashine without us?" "No," she said, a sober tone in her voice. "It will have to be you. You must set off for Terrashine tonight, Kaleb." "Why? My place is here with you and with the others." Teva shook her broad, furry head. "This dragon needs our help. By the looks of where we found it, the beast cannot find its way home." "The dragon needs help?" sputtered Kaleb. "Why should I help it? And to what home? Some den torn into the northern mountains, I'd wager." "There is no time to explain, Kaleb," said Teva. Her dark brows were furrowed. She seemed to be working up some kind of plan in her mind. I guess you will just have to trust my instincts. Kaleb glanced up again at the agonized beast and scratched his weary head. Tell me something, Teva. By the way you behaved a few moments ago, one would think that you and this dragon were long-lost friends. Oh, but we are, said the wolf, looking up at him and laughing. There is more to this dragon than I at first realized. Now, I need a piece of your uniform. Quickly, give it to me. The uniform? Yes, tear off a piece of cloth from the bottom of your uniform. Realizing that Teva had no intention of arguing the point, Kaleb sighed and used the head of his axe to open a seam in the black stone-render uniform he was wearing. He set down his axe and tore a wide patch of cloth from the rest of the garment. Teva snatched it from his hand before he could hand it to her. Thanks, she called over her shoulder as she tore off unexpectedly into the undergrowth at the edge of the clearing. In a flash, she disappeared into the trees, leaving Kaleb alone with the dragon again. Kaleb licked his lips nervously as he turned toward the giant beast. But the dragon paid Kaleb no mind. It just went on licking its ugly, frothing wound and moaning in soft, high-pitched whines. Just then, pale sunlight broke on the horizon in the distance. Kaleb watched as the first rays of morning shot through the patchy leaves, painting flickering lights on the trees that ring the clearing. Teva reappeared out of the undergrowth, carrying a piece of dampened cloth between her teeth. She stopped in front of Kaleb and dropped the cloth on the ground. Your hands will serve better than my fangs for this, the wolf said. For what? Teva motioned toward the dragon with her snout. The creature's brilliant orange fur had begun to glow in the morning sun that broke through the leaves from all directions. Crawl up on its back, Kaleb, and hold that cloth against its wound. You want me to climb up the dragon? Yes, the wound must be cleaned, and the bleeding staunch before you leave. Leave for where? For Terrashine, the wolf growled impatiently. Terrashine, said Kaleb. How else will Fallwrinkle heal it? The wolf asked. But there's no time, Kaleb. See to the beast's wound. Exhaling his frustration, Kaleb approached the giant beast. The dragon had finally set itself down on the wet grass. It laid its long head against the ground and breathed in short, belabored breaths. Trying hard to mask his own rapid breaths, Kaleb attempted to touch the dragon's hind leg. The beast flinched and swiveled its head to glare at him. Kaleb glanced back at Teva, who nodded encouragement for him to continue. Kaleb took a deep, slow breath. Then he tried to ease himself up on the creature's back. This time the creature did not resist his touch. The dragon's fur was surprisingly soft. It didn't take long for Kaleb to reach the wound, which ran like a short ridge alongside the dragon's thick backbone. The gash was narrow, but no less than 2 feet long. The wound had likely widened as the dragon thrashed about with the weapon in its hide during the battle in Ablerin. Kaleb laid the damp cloth Teva had given him against the scabbed and bloody flesh. The dragon jerked a bit at the touch of Kaleb's hand. But when the initial pain subsided, the creature relaxed under Kaleb's knees. Kaleb took another deep breath. Now that the dragon seemed less threatening, the young man finally got the chance to feel the creature's luxuriously soft fur under his fingers and observe its brilliant coloring up close. He sensed the tough sinews of the dragon's back twitching slightly between his fingers whenever he placed pressure against the sword wound. When it seemed like the makeshift bandage had staunched the dragon's bleeding, Kaleb left the blood-soaked cloth on the dragon's wound and began to climb down off the dragon's back. Where do you think you're going? Teva shouted up to him. Kaleb swiveled to face her from where he sat, perched on the dragon's back. To get the others, of course. Day is breaking. We must get them back to Terrashine before our enemies close in. Glista "And I will lead them from here," Teva replied. "You remain with the dragon." "But you cannot leave me here alone with a wounded dragon," protested Kaleb. "Who said anything about staying here?" With that, the wolf trotted over to the dragon's head and knelt down by its scaly ear. She whispered something into it. The dragon whimpered a bit, but nodded its long head in what appeared to be a show of understanding. "Teva, what is happening?" Kaleb shouted. For just then the dragon's powerful hind legs tensed up and the creature rose to a standing position, with Kaleb still perched on its back. Kaleb clutched the creature's fur tightly between white-knuckled fingers. "Slide up toward its neck and away from the wound," Teva said. "Wrap your arms around the neck if you can." Concerned now that he could not descend from the dragon without breaking his ankles in a nasty fall, Kaleb inched his way up the dragon's neck. He had never looked down on the world from this high up, despite being one of the tallest Dellbloods in his village. "Teva, this is crazy. Surely you don't intend for me to—" But before Kaleb could finish the sentence, the dragon's powerful wings unfurled on either side of him. The dragon began flapping them with ever-increasing speed, creating cold drafts of air that rushed past Kaleb's feet. "Teva, I can't." "Yes, you can. Kaleb, you must," Teva shouted. "A human is better suited to ride on the beast than a wolf. My limbs will not reach around his neck, and there is no time to find Glista." To ride on it?" "I will look after the others, Kaleb. Just get the dragon to Fallwrinkle. The beast's sight is too poor for him to find Terrashine without your help." The dragon crouched for a second, then shot up into the air like a chip of Tilbury wood, flying off Kaleb's chopping block in Greenwich Wood. Kaleb clung tightly to the dragon's neck as the creature rose like a weightless platform under his tense body. "But what about the creatures in Terrashine?" he shouted down. "Will he not harm them?" "There is no need to worry. You will understand soon enough," barked Glista over the flapping noise created by the dragon's wings. Their conversation ended there. Within moments, the dragon had risen above the trees and began swiftly circling the green woods below them. Kaleb blinked as the garish morning sunlight struck his eyes. Clasping his wrists tightly, with the opposite hand he leaned forward. Below him the distant forest stretched out for what seemed like miles to the east, and hundreds of feet below them. Just then the dragon let out a short screech. Kaleb pulled in close to the beast's right ear. "To your right," Kaleb shouted, venturing to unclasp his hands for the moment and point with his right hand toward the eastern woods. The giant flying beast shot off eastward without a warning to its jolted passenger. Breathing rapidly, Kaleb buried his face against the dragon's orange fur. Despite the weakened, uneven movements of the dragon's wings, which Kaleb attributed to its painful wound, the creature sped over the landscape below. The two of them zipped by acre after acre of plush green forest, coasting on chilly winds that made Kaleb's skin stand up as they neared Terrashine.